Alcatraz Federal Penitentiary, California. October 17, 1957. The prison cafeteria smelled of stale coffee and desperation. When Eric Pollson, 240 pounds of muscle, swastika tattoos crawling up his neck, spit in Bumpy Johnson's direction, every convict in D Block stopped breathing. Pollson leaned in. "Go back to picking cotton, boy," Bumpy Johnson smiled. Not a nervous smile, not a scared smile. The kind of smile that made Pollson's cellmate later say he should have run right then. Pollson was exactly the kind of man who'd never backed down from anything. 3 murder convictions, champion prison weightlifter, Texas rapist who'd laughed when they sentenced him. He saw Bumpy, a 52-year-old black man doing time for narcotics, and thought he'd found easy prey. But here's what Pollson didn't know. In Harlem, men didn't disrespect Bumpy Johnson and live to talk about it. And Alcatraz was just another neighborhood. What happened in the next 72 hours would become prison legend, not because of what Bumpy did, but because of how he did it. October 31st, 1905. Charleston, South Carolina. Ellsworth Raymond Johnson came into a world that didn't want him. His parents, Margaret Moultrie and William Johnson, understood one truth. Being black in the Jim Crow South meant living with a target on your back. Young Ellsworth had a bump on the back of his head from a childhood injury. Kids called him Bumpy. The name stuck. When he was 10 years old, his world changed forever. His older brother Willie was accused of killing a white man. Didn't matter if it was true. In 1915 South Carolina, an accusation was a death sentence. The lynch mobs were coming. The Johnson family scattered. They ran. They fled north with nothing but the clothes on their backs and prayers their names wouldn't make it into the wrong ears. By 1919, 14-year-old Bumpy arrived in Harlem. Not the Harlem of jazz clubs and Renaissance culture, the Harlem of survival. Of immigrants and migrants all fighting for scraps. His sister Mabel took him in, but she couldn't protect him from what he saw every day. White-owned stores charging triple what they charged downtown. Cops breaking black men's ribs for sport. Kids his age working 16-hour days for pennies. And everywhere the message, "You don't matter, you're nothing." But Bumpy Johnson watched, and he learned. The streets taught Bumpy what school couldn't. He dropped out of high school not because he was stupid, but because he was smart enough to see where the real power lived. Power wasn't in classrooms. It was in the pool halls, the card games, the numbers runners who collected bets from factory workers dreaming of hitting it big. Bumpy noticed something the older hustlers missed. Intelligence beat muscle every time. The guys who lasted weren't the toughest. They were the smartest. The ones who could read people, predict moves, make alliances. He fell in with the wrong crowd, or maybe the right crowd depending on how you looked at it. Small-time theft, running errands for local gangsters, learning the rhythm of the streets, who owed who feared who respected who. And that last word, respect. Bumpy realized that was the currency that mattered most. By his early 20s, Bumpy Johnson had been arrested more times than he could count. Assault, armed robbery, the usual charges for a young black man trying to survive in a city designed to crush him. Prison became his second home, but every time he went in, he came out harder, smarter, more calculating. Bumpy Johnson walked into a basement on 140th Street and met the woman who would change his life. Stephanie sent. Claire. Madame sent. Claire wasn't like anyone Bumpy had ever seen. A black woman from Martinique who ran the most profitable numbers racket in Harlem. While white gangsters thought they owned New York, Claire was pulling in thousands a week from Harlem's working poor. The numbers game was simple. People bet on a 3-digit number hoping it matched the day's winning combination. The odds were terrible. The payout was huge, and St. Clair had turned it into an empire. She needed muscle, but not just muscle. She needed someone smart enough to protect her operation from the vultures circling. Cops demanding bribes, small-time crooks trying to steal, and most dangerous of all, the Italian and Jewish mobs who wanted Harlem for themselves. Bumpy became her most trusted enforcer, not because he was the biggest, not because he was the meanest, because he understood leverage. When a cop tried to shake down one of St. Clair's runners, Bumpy didn't fight him. He followed him home, learned where his kids went to school, where his wife shopped. Then he had a conversation, a very polite conversation. The cop never asked for a bribe again. When a rival tried to muscle in on their territory, Bumpy didn't just beat him up. He bought information about the rival's suppliers, cut off his supply chain, made him irrelevant. Bumpy Johnson was playing chess while everyone else was playing checkers, and he was just getting started. By 1932, Bumpy Johnson had become St. Clair's right hand. While she ran the business, he ran the streets. And he was rewriting the rules. Most enforcers used fear. Bumpy used respect. He walked into barber shops, pool halls, churches, talked to people, remembered names. When someone's kid needed medicine, Bumpy made sure they had money. When a family got evicted, Bumpy found them a place to stay. Harlem's working poor loved him, not because he was soft, but because he understood them. And when you have the community's love, you have something more powerful than guns. But Bumpy's real genius was his alliance strategy. He understood what many black gangsters didn't. You couldn't beat the Italians by fighting them. You had to make them need you. He developed relationships with mid-level Italian mobsters, shared information, helped them solve problems, made himself valuable. Then came Dutch Schultz. The Dutchman Arthur Flegenheimer was a psychopath with a business degree. He controlled bootlegging, policy games, and protection rackets across New York. In 1932, he decided he wanted Harlem's numbers game too, and he came at Stephanie St. Clair hard. Schultz sent his crew to beat St. Clair's runners, burned down locations, murdered anyone who resisted. The Harlem Numbers War resulted in over 40 murders in less than 2 years. But Bumpy Johnson didn't panic. He went to Charles "Lucky" Luciano, the most powerful mobster in New York. The meeting happened in a basement on Mulberry Street. Luciano sat at a poker table counting money. Bumpy walked in unarmed. "I hear Dutch is giving you a headache," Luciano said, not looking up. "Dutch is giving you a headache," Bumpy replied. "You think after he takes Harlem he's gonna stop?" That got Luciano's attention. Bumpy laid out the mathematics. Schultz was uncontrollable, unpredictable, the kind of boss who'd start wars that hurt everyone's business. But if something happened to Schultz, Bumpy could take over the Harlem Numbers operation, pay tribute to Luciano's commission, keep things professional. 3 months later, on October 23, 1935, Dutch Schultz was gunned down in a New Jersey chop house. Bumpy Johnson became the de facto boss of Harlem's policy banks. By the late 1930s, Bumpy Johnson controlled numbers, loan sharking, and protection across 100 blocks of Harlem. He employed hundreds of people, moved millions of dollars. But he moved different than other gangsters. He wore tailored suits, spoke proper English when he needed to, carried books, Voltaire, Machiavelli, Sun Tzu. People called him the Professor. Malcolm X, who met Bumpy as a teenager, later said, "Bumpy was the first person I knew who read philosophy and still commanded fear." In the streets, his word was law, not because he killed the most people, but because when Bumpy Johnson said something, it happened. If he said a beef was settled, it was settled. If he said someone was under his protection, nobody touched them. If he said you crossed the line, you'd already crossed it. And then came the heroin. But there was one problem Bumpy couldn't solve with strategy alone. The federal government decided Harlem's drug problem needed a face. And that face was Bumpy Johnson. The FBI had been watching him for years. They had informants, surveillance photos, wiretaps. On June 12, 1953, Bumpy Johnson was convicted as the leader of a heroin conspiracy ring. The sentence, 15 years in federal prison. The destination, Alcatraz, the Rock, the most brutal federal prison in America. Alcatraz wasn't like other prisons. It was where the Bureau of Prisons sent the inmates who couldn't be controlled anywhere else. Al Capone, Machine Gun Kelly, the worst of the worst. And in 1954, Bumpy Johnson, age 49, became inmate number 1117. Alcatraz had its own social order, and at the bottom of that order were black prisoners. The prison was unofficially segregated. Black inmates got the worst cells, the worst work details. The guards looked the other way when violence happened. And some inmates, particularly white supremacists from Texas, Alabama, Mississippi, saw black prisoners as targets. Eric Pollson was one of those men. Born 1919 in Alabama, convicted of 3 separate murders, all of black men, during armed robberies. Sent to Alcatraz in 1953 after killing another inmate in Leavenworth. Pollson was 240 pounds of muscle from prison weightlifting, covered in racist tattoos, leader of a white supremacist gang inside the prison, the kind of man who'd beaten black inmates unconscious and never faced consequences. To Pollson, Bumpy Johnson looked like every other target on the Rock, just another victim waiting to happen. But here's what made this situation different. In Harlem, Bumpy commanded armies. In Alcatraz, he had nothing. No crew, no weapons, no political capital, and Pollson, he had everything. The white gangs controlled the yard, they controlled the contraband, they had guards on their payroll. Most black inmates kept their heads down, survived, tried not to make waves. But Bumpy Johnson had never kept his head down in his life. And when Pollson started his campaign of disrespect, bumping into Bumpy in the yard, taking his food in the cafeteria, making racial slurs, everyone wondered the same thing. How do you fight a man who controls the prison when you have no power at all? What Bumpy did next surprised everyone, including Pollson. October 17, 1957, the prison cafeteria, 11:47 a.m. Bumpy sat at a table with 2 other black inmates, eating the slop the prison called lunch. Pollson approached with his crew, 4 men who looked like they'd been carved from stone. Pollson reached down, grabbed Bumpy's tray, dumped it on the floor. The cafeteria went silent, 400 inmates watching. "Clean that up, boy," Pollson said. Bumpy looked up, slowly. His eyes met Pollson's, and then he smiled, that smile. "You know," Bumpy said, voice calm, "where I come from, a man disrespects you like that, he better be prepared for what comes next." Pollson laughed. His crew laughed. "And what's coming next, boy? You gonna snitch to the guards?" Bumpy stood up. 5'10", 165 pounds, 52 years old. He looked up at Pollson's 6'3" frame. "No, I'm just gonna wait." The guards moved in before anything could happen, separated them, wrote up Bumpy for inciting violence. Pollson walked away laughing. To him it was over. He'd won, proved what he already knew. Bumpy Johnson was nobody in here. But that night in D Block, Bumpy started having conversations with the Puerto Rican inmates, the Mexican nationals, the Native Americans, every non-white prisoner who'd been victims of Pollson's crew. He wasn't organizing a fight. He was gathering information. Who did Pollson trust? Where did he go? What was his routine? And most importantly, who wanted him gone? Turned out Pollson had enemies everywhere. Even some white inmates hated him. He was too violent, too unstable, the kind of man who made everyone's life harder. 3 days later, Pollson made his second mistake. He cornered Bumpy in the prison workshop. No guards around. Pollson held a sharpened screwdriver. "I've killed 3 of you people," Pollson said. "You're gonna be number 4. Bumpy didn't move. "Then do it, right now. Because the moment you walk away, you're a dead man." Pollson hesitated, something in Bumpy's voice, that absolute certainty. He put the screwdriver away. "You're not worth the hole," and he walked away. That was his last mistake. Because Bumpy Johnson never bluffed. What happened next became case study material for criminal psychologists. Bumpy didn't attack Pollson. He didn't fight him. He did something far more sophisticated. He made Pollson paranoid. It started small. Pollson's cigarettes went missing from his cell, his contraband coffee, the dirty magazines he'd bribed guards for. Then his crew started having accidents. One guy slipped in the shower. Another got jumped by Mexican inmates. A third got caught with contraband and sent to solitary. Nothing led back to Bumpy. He was always somewhere else, with witnesses, alibis, but Pollson knew. He knew it was Bumpy. He just couldn't prove it, and that made him angry, made him sloppy. Pollson started threatening everyone, making enemies faster than he could count them. The guards noticed, started watching him closer. Meanwhile, Bumpy stayed quiet, stayed small, played chess in the rec yard, read his books, The Model Prisoner. The turning point came from an unexpected source. There was an Alcatraz guard named Sullivan, Irish immigrant, worked the night shift. He didn't care about racism. He cared about order. Pollson had become a problem for order. Bumpy approached Sullivan during yard time. November 14, 1957. "Officer Sullivan," Bumpy said, "can I ask you something?" "Make it quick, Johnson." "What happens if someone gets attacked, really attacked, in a place where there's no cameras?" Sullivan looked at him. "Depends. If it's a race thing, everyone assumes the black guy started it. If it's something else, we investigate." Bumpy nodded. "What if someone got attacked because of what he did outside the prison, like something the guards wouldn't protect him from?" Sullivan's eyes narrowed. "You asking hypothetically?" "Always hypothetical, officer." Sullivan walked away, but Bumpy saw it in his face. That consideration, that understanding. The next week, Sullivan started his own investigation into Pollson, asked around. Discovered Pollson had been extorting other inmates, running a protection racket, threatening guards' families. Sullivan submitted a report, recommended Pollson be transferred, but transfers took time, paperwork, approvals, and Bumpy didn't have time. November 20th, 1957, Recreation Yard. Pollson was working out, bench press, 225 pounds, his crew standing around him. Bumpy sat on a bench 30 feet away, reading Dante's Inferno. A Puerto Rican inmate named Ramos approached Pollson. "Hey, your guy owes me cigarettes." "Not my problem," Pollson said. "Yeah, it is, because he said you'd pay." Pollson sat up, annoyed. "Who the hell are you two?" That's when 3 more guys walked up. Mexican, black, Native American all at once. "The hell is this?" Pollson stood. Ramos smiled. "This is what happens when you make too many enemies." What happened next happened fast. They didn't beat Pollson badly, just enough. Enough that guards had to intervene. Enough that Pollson went to the infirmary. And here's the beautiful part. Nobody mentioned Bumpy Johnson. Not once. Not in statements, not in reports. It was just a yard fight. Happens all the time. Pollson came back 2 days later, angrier, more paranoid. And now he knew with absolute certainty that Bumpy had orchestrated it. He found Bumpy in the cafeteria. This time no words. Pollson just stared across 40 feet of tables and inmates. That look said everything. This isn't over. Bumpy stared back, that same smile. That look said, yes, it is. You just don't know it yet. Everything had led to this moment. November 25th, 1957. 2:17 p.m. The prison workshop. A massive room filled with tables, tools, machinery. 40 inmates working on furniture, license plates, whatever the prison system sold to make money. 4 guards supervising. Too few for too many men. Bumpy worked at a table near the back, sanding wood. The rhythmic sound of his work blending into the general noise of the shop. Pollson worked at a table 15 feet away, metal shop, grinding down license plates. The tension in that room was thick enough to cut. Every inmate knew. Somehow everyone knew. Something was about to happen. The guards knew it too. Guard Morrison kept watching them both, his hand near his baton. 2:23 p.m. Pollson stood, walked toward Bumpy's table. Morrison tensed. But Pollson just walked past, went to the bathroom. The room exhaled. 2:31 p.m. Pollson came back, but this time he had something in his hand, a prison shank. 4 inches of sharpened metal he'd stolen from the metal shop. He walked straight to Bumpy's table. Outside, yard, tonight, Pollson said, low enough that guards couldn't hear. I'm gonna gut you like the animal you are. Bumpy didn't look up from his sanding. No, what? I said no. You want to fight me, you'll do it here. Now, in front of guards, in front of witnesses. Pollson laughed. You crazy, they'll throw us both in the hole. Exactly, which means you can't kill me. Which means this ends today. Pollson's face twisted. You think you're smart, don't you? Think you're better than me? Bumpy finally looked up. And what he said next, every inmate in that workshop remembered. I don't think I'm better than you. I know I am. Because you're standing here with a weapon, threatening an unarmed man, and you still can't make yourself do it. You know why? Because even you know deep down that the moment you touch me, everyone you've got left abandons you. Even your own people. Silence. You're a coward, Pollson said. Maybe, but I'm alive, and by tomorrow you won't have an eye. What happened next happened in seconds. Pollson lunged. Not at Bumpy, at Morrison, the guard. He was desperate, angry, wanted to provoke something, anything. Morrison's baton came up. Pollson grabbed it. They wrestled. And in the chaos, 3 things happened simultaneously. An alarm went off. Guards rushed in from other areas. Inmates scattered, some fighting each other, some just trying to get out of the way. And Bumpy Johnson picked up his sanding block, dense, heavy wood, and threw it. Not at Pollson. At the overhead light above Pollson's table. Glass exploded. The workshop plunged into partial darkness. In the confusion, in the chaos, in those 15 seconds before guards restored order, Ramos, the Puerto Rican inmate, moved with precision. A homemade shank. One quick motion. Eric Pollson screamed. His hands went to his face, blood everywhere. When the lights came back on, Pollson was on the ground, right eye destroyed. Ramos was already gone, disappeared into the crowd. Guards swarmed. Dragged Pollson to the infirmary. They questioned everyone. Nobody saw anything. 40 inmates, 4 guards, complete chaos. Nobody mentioned Bumpy Johnson. He sat at his table, calmly sanding his wood, covered in sawdust. Guard Morrison approached him. Johnson, you see what happened? Bumpy looked up, that smile. I saw a man who made a lot of enemies finally pay for it, sir. Terrible thing. Violence solves nothing. Morrison stared at him. They both knew. But knowing and proving are different things. As they led Bumpy back to his cell that night, an old-timer black inmate named Lewis walked beside him. How'd you do it? Lewis whispered. How'd you take down Pollson without even touching him? Bumpy didn't break stride. Same way I did everything else. I made people believe that helping me was helping themselves. And I made them believe that touching me would cost everything they had. Pause. Respect isn't given, it's engineered. Eric Pollson lost his right eye, spent 3 weeks in the infirmary, then 6 months in solitary for his role in starting the workshop riot. He never named Ramos, never named anyone, because in prison, snitching was worse than death. And Pollson, for all his faults, understood that one code. When he came back to general population, he was different, quieter. One of his crew members said later, it was like something broke in him, not his body, his mind. The white supremacist gang kicked him out, said he was weak, couldn't protect them anymore. Pollson spent the rest of his sentence alone. No crew, no power, just a one-eyed man who learned too late what everyone in Harlem already knew: you don't disrespect Bumpy Johnson. As for Bumpy, the guards investigated, found nothing. He'd never touched Pollson, never organized anything traceable, but his reputation inside Alcatraz changed overnight. Black inmates started sitting with him in the cafeteria, asking advice, treating him like what he was, royalty in exile. Even some white inmates showed respect. A nod in the yard, a wide berth in the hallways. Bumpy Johnson, inmate number 1117, became the most untouchable man on the rock. November 16, 1963. Bumpy Johnson walked out of Alcatraz a free man. He'd served nearly 10 years. A parade met him when he arrived back in Harlem. Not a police parade, a people's parade. Hundreds of black residents lining 125th Street cheering. Harlem had changed. The numbers racket had been taken over by the Italian mob. The heroin trade exploded. The neighborhood was dying from drugs, poverty, and neglect. But Bumpy Johnson's return gave people hope. He tried to go legit, opened a few businesses, invested in community programs, but the streets kept calling. He became close with Malcolm X, providing security when Malcolm's life was threatened by the Nation of Islam. Their friendship was an odd pairing, the gangster and the revolutionary, but they shared something, a refusal to bow. Malcolm later wrote about Bumpy. He was one of the few people I knew who understood that respect means more than fear. Bumpy also mentored a young hustler named Frank Lucas, taught him the drug game. Lucas would later build an empire smuggling heroin from Southeast Asia, claiming to be Bumpy's heir. But Bumpy himself remained old school. He hated what heroin was doing to Harlem, hated seeing kids nodding off on corners. Some say that's why he went semi-legit. Others say he was just too old to keep fighting. The 1960s Harlem wasn't the Harlem of his youth. The Italians controlled everything. The NYPD was more corrupt than ever, and the civil rights movement was changing the game entirely. Bumpy adapted, always adapted, but his body was wearing down, years of stress, decades of violence. The food in Alcatraz, his heart was failing. On July 7, 1968, Bumpy Johnson sat down for breakfast at Wells Restaurant on 7th Avenue. Fried chicken, eggs, coffee, his usual spot. His usual Sunday meal, he never finished it. 2:17 a.m. Bumpy clutched his chest, fell forward. His face hit the table. Massive heart attack. He was dead before the ambulance arrived. 62 years old. Frank Lucas was there. He later said, Bumpy died like he lived, in Harlem, surrounded by his people, on his own terms. But that last part wasn't quite true. Bumpy had been under federal indictment again. Drug conspiracy. The FBI was circling. Some say the stress is what killed him. Others say it was just time. Either way, Ellsworth Raymond Bumpy Johnson was gone. His funeral was held at Abyssinian Baptist Church on 138th Street. Over 1,000 people attended. Street hustlers, businessmen, preachers, teachers, housewives, the entire social spectrum of Black Harlem. They didn't eulogize him as a saint. Nobody pretended he was something he wasn't. Reverend Dr. Calvin O. Butts III, who wasn't at the funeral but studied Bumpy's life years later, said, Bumpy Johnson was a product of systemic racism that gave black men two choices: be crushed or fight back. He chose to fight. His widow, Mame Hatcher Johnson, wore black and didn't cry, at least not in public. She buried her husband at Woodlawn Cemetery in the Bronx. His gravestone was simple, just his name, his dates, nothing fancy. But in Harlem, they didn't need a gravestone to remember. The legend lived on. Bumpy Johnson's death marked the end of an era. He was the last of the old-school Harlem gangsters, the ones who followed a code, the ones who believed in community protection, even while running illegal enterprises. Historians have debated Bumpy's legacy for decades. Was he a Robin Hood figure who helped the community, or just another criminal who perpetuated the cycle of violence? Dr. Jeffrey O.G. Ogbar, a historian at the University of Connecticut, wrote, "Bumpy Johnson represents the contradictions of black life in mid-20th century America. He was simultaneously a predator and a protector, a criminal and a community figure. To reduce him to either hero or villain misses the complexity of the system that created him." Malcolm X said it more bluntly. Bumpy Johnson did what he had to do to survive in a country that wanted him dead. I don't condone it, but I understand it. Lucky Luciano, the Italian mob boss who worked with Bumpy, once told an associate, "That black guy from Harlem, smartest man I ever met, could have run General Motors if they'd let him in the building." But maybe the most telling observation came from Frank Lucas, who went on to build his own heroin empire. Lucas said, "Bumpy taught me everything, but I didn't listen to his most important lesson: drugs destroy everything." He knew that, hated it, but by the time he realized it, it was too late to stop the flood. Today, Bumpy Johnson has been immortalized in films, TV shows, and books. The 1997 movie Hoodlum featured Lawrence Fishburne as Bumpy. The 2007 film American Gangster showed his relationship with Frank Lucas. And starting in 2019, Forrest Whitaker portrayed him in the TV series Godfather of Harlem. But the real Bumpy Johnson was more complex than any Hollywood portrayal. He lived in a time when black men had almost no legitimate paths to power, when racism was legal, when police brutality was standard practice, when survival itself was an act of defiance. Bumpy Johnson didn't just survive, he thrived. He commanded respect in a world that tried to strip it from him. He built power in a system designed to keep him powerless. Was he a criminal? Absolutely. Did he hurt people? Without question. But did he also represent something deeper, a refusal to accept the limitations white America placed on black ambition? That's the question that makes his legacy complicated and enduring. The incident at Alcatraz with Eric Pollson, it wasn't just about revenge. It was about a man asserting his humanity in a place designed to strip it away. It was about refusing to be broken. So what do we learn from the story of Bumpy Johnson? That respect isn't about size. It's not about violence. It's about understanding power dynamics better than everyone else. When Eric Pollson confronted Bumpy in Alcatraz, he thought he had all the power, the strength, the allies, the intimidation. But Bumpy understood something Pollson never learned. Real power is making people believe that hurting you costs more than helping you. Bumpy didn't have weapons. He had psychology. He didn't have a crew. He had influence. And in the end, influence beat muscle. Strategy beat strength. Intelligence beat intimidation. Picture this: a 52-year-old man, 165 pounds, staring down a 240-pound murderer covered in swastika tattoos. No backup, no weapons, no advantages. Just a smile. That smile said, "I've survived things you can't imagine. I've outsmarted men smarter than you. And if you think this prison makes you powerful, you've already lost." Bumpy Johnson, October 31, 1905 to July 7, 1968. the godfather of Harlem who proved that in a world designed to crush you, intelligence is the ultimate weapon. If this story of strategy, survival, and refusing to back down moved you, hit that subscribe button. We dive deep into untold stories of power, respect, and the people who refuse to play by the rules. Drop a comment. What would you have done in Bumpy's situation? How do you stand up when you have no power? And remember, respect isn't given, it's engineered. Until next time.